May 2024. Across America, Red Lobster employees show up for their shifts and find the doors locked. No warning, no phone call, just a sign taped to the glass. This location is permanently closed. Within days, entire restaurants are being auctioned off online. Kitchen equipment, furniture, the lobster tanks. Everything must go. And the internet immediately decides who the killer is. Shrimp. A $20 all-you-can-eat endless shrimp deal that went so catastrophically wrong, it supposedly bankrupted a $2 billion American institution. It's a funny story. It went viral. Late-night hosts joked about it. There's just one problem. It isn't true. The shrimp lost Red Lobster $11 million. The company's rent bill that same year? $200 million. And the reason Red Lobster, a company that once owned the land under hundreds of its own restaurants, was suddenly drowning in rent, is one of the oldest and most ruthless plays in the Wall Street playbook. This isn't a story about shrimp. It's a story about how you can rob a company in broad daylight, perfectly legally, and let a crustacean take the blame. I'm opening the file. This is Bankruptcy Files. Case number 1. Red Lobster. To understand what was stolen, you have to understand what was built. Lakeland, Florida. A restaurateur named Bill Darden opens a single seafood restaurant. His idea sounds almost boring today, but at the time it was radical. Fresh, affordable seafood for regular families, not just people living on the coasts. Because in 1968, if you lived in Kansas or Ohio, seafood was either a luxury or a frozen brick. Darden wanted the middle of America to eat shrimp. It worked. Fast. Within 2 years, the restaurant was so successful that General Mills, the cereal giant, bought the whole operation and started pouring money into expansion. Red Lobster spread across the country through the 70s and 80s, and it did something bigger than sell fish. It became a ritual. Birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, prom night. For millions of American families, we're going to Red Lobster meant tonight is special. Then, in 1992, came the weapon. A warm, garlicky, impossibly soft biscuit served free at every table. The Cheddar Bay Biscuit. It became arguably more famous than the seafood itself. People wrote songs about it. Red Lobster would eventually serve hundreds of millions of them a year. In 1995, General Mills spun off its restaurant division into a new public company named after the founder, Darden Restaurants, which also owned Olive Garden. And at its peak, Red Lobster stood at roughly 700 locations, the largest seafood restaurant chain on the planet. And here's a detail that matters more than anything else in this story. Write it down. It's the murder weapon later. Red Lobster owned its real estate, the buildings, hundreds of them, decades of accumulated property across America. That real estate was the company's skeleton. In a bad year, you can survive a lot when you don't pay rent. Remember that. Now, before we get to the crime, there's a strange piece of foreshadowing in this file, and it's almost too perfect. All you can eat snow crab legs. Management makes one small miscalculation. They don't account for how much crab a determined American can physically consume, right as crab prices are spiking. Customers order third and fourth helpings. The company bleeds millions in a matter of weeks. The president of Red Lobster loses her job over it. 20 years before Endless Shrimp, Red Lobster had already run this exact experiment and learned this exact lesson. Never make endless a promise you can't afford. Which raises an uncomfortable question we'll come back to. In 2023, when the company made Endless Shrimp a permanent menu item, did nobody remember? Or did somebody remember perfectly well and not care? Hold that thought. Through the 2000s and early 2010s, Red Lobster aged. Casual dining as a whole was slowing down. Younger customers drifted toward fast casual, Chipotle instead of a sit-down dinner. Sales sagged, and on Wall Street, activist investors began circling Darden Restaurants, demanding it cut the struggling brand loose and unlock the value hiding inside it. And what was the value hiding inside it? Say it with me. The real estate. In 2014, Darden gave in. Red Lobster was sold. And the buyer is where this story turns. The buyer was Golden Gate Capital, a private equity firm out of San Francisco. $1 billion. Now, if you don't live in the finance world, here's the honest, plain English version of how a deal like this often works. A private equity firm buys a company, usually with a large amount of borrowed money. Here's the part that sounds like it shouldn't be legal, but absolutely is. The debt doesn't stay with the firm. It gets loaded onto the company that was just purchased. The target pays for its own acquisition. But Golden Gate did something even more elegant. Almost immediately after buying Red Lobster, it sold the company's crown jewel, that real estate we told you to remember. $5 billion. Do the math with me. 1 billion. 5 billion. In a single transaction, Golden Gate recovered most of what it had paid while still owning the entire company. This maneuver has a name, a sale-leaseback. And for Red Lobster, it meant something brutal. The company that had spent 50 years buying its own land was now a tenant in its own buildings. Locked into long-term leases, reportedly averaging around 25 years, with rent increases built into the contracts, climbing about 2% every single year, forever. And these were what the industry calls triple net leases, meaning Red Lobster didn't just pay rent. It also paid the property taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance on buildings it no longer owned. Think about what that does to a struggling restaurant chain. Before, a bad location could limp along cheaply on land you owned outright. Now, every location, good or bad, came with a rent check that went up every year and a lease you couldn't escape for decades. If a restaurant was bleeding money, you often couldn't even close it. You'd owe the rent anyway. And if this playbook sounds familiar, it should. The same asset stripping technique: buy the company, sell its real estate, pocket the cash, leave the rent bill behind, shows up in the files of Sears, Mervyn's, Shopko, nursing home chains, hospital operators. Red Lobster wasn't a one-off. It was the next name on a very long list. That's why this channel exists, by the way, because once you learn to recognize this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. The trap was set. It just needed time. There was even one last, surreal moment of glory. In 2016, Beyoncé name-dropped Red Lobster in her single formation, and sales at the chain reportedly spiked overnight. Think about that image. A fading restaurant empire, quietly bleeding rent money by design, getting a sudden jolt of life from a pop lyric. The crowd came for a weekend. The leases stayed for 25 years. And Golden Gate, by the time the trap fully closed, it was long gone. Starting in 2016, it began selling its stake to a new owner. And this is where the file gets genuinely strange. The new owner was Thai Union Group, a Thai seafood conglomerate, one of the largest seafood suppliers on Earth. First, a minority stake in 2016. Then, together with an investor group, full control by 2020. Stop and look at that arrangement for a second. Red Lobster's biggest supplier of shrimp now owned Red Lobster. That means the company selling the shrimp and the company buying the shrimp answered to the same boss. Every dollar Red Lobster spent on shrimp was potentially a dollar flowing toward its own owner. Analysts have a polite term for this: a conflict of interest. A less polite term might be the fox now owned the henhouse. Meanwhile, the company itself was becoming unmanageable. CEOs came and went through a revolving door. Red Lobster burned through leader after leader in just a few years. Then COVID hit sit-down dining like a wrecking ball. And inflation drove up the cost of food and labor. And underneath all of it, that rent bill kept ticking upward, 2% a year, exactly as designed. By 2023, Red Lobster was paying over $190 million a year in rent, roughly 10 cents of every dollar it earned, gone before a single shrimp hit a grill. The bankruptcy filing would later reveal that about $64 million of that was going to locations that were losing money, restaurants the company was essentially paying for the privilege of keeping open. The company was starving, and that's when someone decided the answer was endless shrimp. June 2023. Red Lobster takes ultimate endless shrimp, historically a short, controlled, limited time promotion, and makes it a permanent menu item. $20. all you can eat, forever. According to the company's own bankruptcy filing, this decision came from then CEO Paul Kenny, an executive with ties to Thai Union, and it went through despite significant pushback from his own management team. The people running the restaurants looked at this plan and said, "This will lose money." It happened anyway. Stores even ran heavy in-house promotion for the deal, pushing customers toward the one item guaranteed to hurt the bottom line. And demand ran so hot that some locations literally ran out of shrimp. America answered the call to duty. Customers camped in booths, ate 10, 12, 15 servings, posted their high scores online. Traffic went up, and the company lost money on the very customers walking through its doors. The final tally on the promotion, about $11 million in losses in a matter of months. The exact mistake from 2003, repeated at full scale as a permanent policy over the objections of management. Now, was it just staggering incompetence? For a while, that was the accepted story. But in 2026, a group of Red Lobster's creditors filed a lawsuit alleging something darker. That endless shrimp wasn't a blunder at all, but part of a scheme to funnel money to Thai Union by force-feeding the chain its owner's own shrimp. Thai Union has faced scrutiny over the arrangement ever since. Proving intent in court is another matter, and that fight is still playing out. And that phrase is exactly right. Because a nail is not a coffin. Fiscal year 2023, a $76 million net loss, of which the famous shrimp accounted for 11. The rent machine built back in 2014 accounted for far more. The company's cash reserves collapsed from around $100 million to under $30 million in just 6 months. Roughly $300 million in debt loomed over everything. In May 2024, those locked doors appeared across the country. Around 100 locations, gone, some closed so abruptly that employees learned they were unemployed from a sign on the door. Within days, liquidators were auctioning off the insides of dead Red Lobsters online. Fryers, booths, neon signs, even the live lobster tanks sold to the highest bidder. 56 years of American dinners, itemized and sold by the lot. Days later, Red Lobster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, turning over ownership for the second time in a single decade, and closing more than a fifth of the empire it had once been. The internet blamed the shrimp. Now you know better. Every case file in this series ends the same way, with an official cause of death. So let's fill out the report. Cause of death: it was not the shrimp. The shrimp was the last domino, $11 million in a collapse measured in billions. The first domino fell a decade earlier in a San Francisco boardroom, when Red Lobster's safety net, 50 years of accumulated American real estate, was converted into someone else's payday and replaced with a rent bill designed to climb forever. Contributing factors: an ownership structure where the company's biggest supplier sat in the owner's chair, a revolving door of executives, a pandemic, and a fatal promotion pushed through over the protests of the people who knew better. Here's the epilogue, though, because this file has one. F. Chang's chief and one of the youngest CEOs of a major American chain. Hundreds of locations survived. The biscuits are still free. The patient is out of the morgue and in recovery, smaller, humbler, and finally free of some of those leases. But the lesson in this file isn't about seafood. It's this. When a beloved company collapses and the story you're handed sounds like a joke, a shrimp deal, a fashion trend, the internet killed it, look for the boring paperwork underneath. Look at who sold the real estate. Look at who owned the supplier. The funny story is usually the cover story. Red Lobster didn't die because America ate too much shrimp. It nearly died because 10 years earlier, someone sold the ground out from under it and walked away before the bill came due. If you want to know which American giant is in the next file, subscribe. A new case opens every week. And if there's a collapsed company you want investigated, put it in the comments. I read every tip.